The silence in the wedding hall. The wedding hall was almost empty. Soft music played through old speakers, echoing in the vast space like a whisper no one wanted to hear. Flowers were everywhere. Red roses, white lilies, and strings of marigold, but their beauty only made the emptiness feel deeper. Mira sat in the center, dressed in a beautiful sari, her hands painted with henna that still smelled of turmeric and hope. She tried to smile, but the corners of her mouth trembled. The priest looked around, confused. Chairs sat untouched. Plates of sweets remained full. Only a few distant relatives lingered out of obligation. The groom's family was present, though not happy. They whispered to each other, eyes scanning the room for guests who never arrived. Mira's mother wiped a tear, pretending to adjust her glasses. Her father paced near the entrance, checking his watch again and again. Sundar wasn't there. 12 hours earlier, Sundar Pichai stood inside a crowded boardroom at Google's headquarters. A major announcement was minutes away. Around him, engineers buzzed with nervous energy. Phones rang. Laptops clicked. Everything was moving fast as always. But Sundar's mind wasn't on the numbers or the screen. It was on a tiny village thousands of miles away. His sister's wedding was happening, and he hadn't even left California. He had promised he would make it. He had told Mira he'd walk her to the mandap. He had even picked out a speech he wanted to give. A simple, heartfelt one about dreams and family. But work had pulled him in, like it always did. A young intern knocked on the glass. "Joy, sir," she said. "Your sister called again." He paused. Something inside him shifted. He excused himself, walked to the hallway, and took a deep breath. He dialed Mira. She answered on the first ring. "You're not coming, are you?" she asked softly. Her voice was calm, but he could hear the weight behind the words, "Mira." He whispered. Don't say sorry," she cut in. "Everyone says sorry. Just do your work. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Not really. Hours passed. Back in the wedding hall, the ceremony began. The groom sat down, the priest started chanting. Mira kept glancing at the entrance. A little boy walked in holding a balloon. The groom's aunt frowned. The priest raised his voice, trying to hold everyone's attention. And just when the fire was lit and the sacred thread was tied between bride and groom, a loud sound came from the entrance. Car doors slammed. Multiple ones. Heels clicked against the pavement. Voices rose. And then Sundar walked in, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked dozens of people, men and women in Google jackets, interns and engineers, some of them still carrying laptops. They looked confused, amazed, and a little emotional. Some had never been to India before. Mira stood up in shock. Sundar walked straight to her, folded his hands, and said, "Sorry I'm late, but I brought a few friends." People began whispering. Cameras clicked. The groom's father looked nervous. The wedding hall was now full. Mira blinked hard, trying to believe what was happening. She looked into her brother's eyes and saw the same boy who once walked barefoot to school beside her, who carried water buckets with her every morning, who never stopped believing in dreams. Even when no one else did. "I told you I'd walk you to the mandap," he smiled, "and I'm not missing it." She laughed through her tears. Then he turned to the audience and said, "Today we're not celebrating just a wedding. We're celebrating the strength of a woman who never gave up even when no one showed up." The crowd fell silent. And then came the applause. But not everyone was smiling. In the corner of the hall, the groom's uncle leaned over to whisper something into another relative's ear. His words were lost under the sound of celebration, but his expression was not. He looked worried and a little angry. Something was wrong, and whatever it was going to change everything. Whispers behind the marigolds. The wedding had transformed. Minutes ago, it was a picture of quiet, heartbreak. Now it shimmered with life. Laughter filled the corners that had stood in silence. Children ran between tables, their arms full of flower petals. Old neighbors from the next village peeked through the windows, whispering to each other, trying to understand how Sundar Pichai had just walked in with what looked like half the Silicon Valley behind him. But not everything was joy. Behind the stage, where garlands hung like soft curtains, an argument was unfolding. The groom's uncle, a tall man with a thick mustache and narrow eyes, paced furiously near the kitchen entrance. His voice was low, but sharp. He pointed toward Sundar, who was still helping Mira adjust her bangles, her nervous hands trembling despite the growing applause. "This is not right," the uncle said to the groom's father. "This man is making a spectacle. This is supposed to be our family's wedding, not a tech seminar." "He's her brother," the father replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "What do you want us to do, send him away?" The uncle leaned in closer. "He didn't just come. He brought foreigners. He brought cameras. He brought attention. This isn't humble. This is dangerous. People will start asking questions about our family, about our past." The father hesitated. His eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe? Guilt. Or both. "Just calm down," he whispered. "The wedding will be over soon. We'll deal with it later." On stage, Mira tried to keep her smile steady, but she could feel the tension too. She wasn't a stranger to it. She had grown up in the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, the kind that comes from people hiding things, not forgetting them. When Sundar was sent away to study in Chennai, it was Mira who stayed back, who managed the small house, who worked part-time at the school library, who stood at the edge of rooms where men spoke over her and women pretended not to listen. She had once wanted to become a teacher, a real one. She had applied to 5 colleges. 3 rejected her, 2 accepted, but her father had refused. "Girls don't go that far from home," he had said, so she stayed. But she never blamed Sundar, even when he got a scholarship to the United States, even when he sent letters that smelled like foreign paper, filled with stories about computers and dreams. She smiled and held the letters to her chest. Now, years later, he stood beside her, again, older, more powerful, but still the boy who used to share his last spoon of rice when they were both hungry. He leaned toward her and said, "You look beautiful, Akka." She smiled, but there was pain in it. "Do you think I made a mistake?" she asked quietly. Sundar looked at her surprised. "Marrying him?" she continued. "He's kind, quiet, but his family, they don't like me. They never have." He hesitated. He had noticed it too. The stiffness in their posture, the way the groom's mother had barely spoken to Mira, how none of their relatives had clapped when she walked in. "Kindness should never feel like a cage," Sundar said, softly. "If it does, it's not kindness." She nodded, then looked down at her hands. The mehndi was already fading slightly, a symbol of joy, already growing pale. Outside the hall, the media had arrived. Someone had posted a video online. Sundar, pichai, walking into a small Indian wedding with Google engineers following him like a scene from a movie. It was spreading fast. News vans began to arrive. Microphones peeked through crowds. Phones recorded everything. A young reporter, maybe just out of college, stood with her cameraman, trying to find someone who would speak. "Who is the bride?" she asked an old woman carrying sweets. "What's the story here?" "No one came to her wedding," the woman whispered, "until he did." Inside, Sundar began to notice the shift in atmosphere. People weren't just celebrating, they were studying him. The groom's family had gone quiet. A few of the elders sat with stiff expressions, whispering to each other in a dialect that Sundar only half remembered. And then, as the final rituals began, something happened. The groom stood up. Suddenly, without warning, the priest looked up in confusion. "I need to speak," the groom said. Just for a moment. The entire hall froze. Mira looked at him, unsure whether to stand or stay seated. He turned to Sundar. "Can we speak privately?" he asked. The request was polite. Too polite. Sundar nodded slowly. They walked toward the back corridor, behind the stage. The priest cleared his throat and told the guests they would resume in 5 minutes. People began whispering again. The Google team looked around. unsure if they were witnessing a cultural moment or something else entirely. In the corridor, under the buzzing tube light, the groom stood with his arms crossed. He was a soft-spoken man, but today his words had a sharpness they never had before. "I appreciate what you did," he began. "Really. You love your sister. It's clear." Sundar waited. "But this spotlight you brought, it's not helping. My family is uncomfortable. They don't like too much attention. And now there are reporters outside." Sundar studied him carefully. He wasn't angry, he was afraid. "What exactly are they afraid of?" Sundar asked. The groom hesitated. "I can't say." "You can," Sundar replied gently. "But maybe you don't want to." A long silence. Then finally, the groom sighed. "There are things you don't know. About my family. About Mira's safety." That word, safety, struck Sundar like a stone. "What do you mean?" Sundar's voice dropped, slow and careful. "Just finish the wedding," the groom said, almost pleading now, "and take your people home. Let us handle things in our way. Quietly." "And what happens to Mira after that?" Sundar asked. "No answer." He didn't wait for one. He turned around and walked back to the hall, but in his chest, something had started to burn. When Sundar returned, he didn't go to his seat. Instead, he walked up to the microphone near the stage. The music stopped. Guests looked up. The priest raised his hand, confused. Sundar spoke into the mic, his voice steady. "Before we complete this ceremony," he said, "I want to say something to my sister." Mira looked stunned. "When we were children, Mira was the strongest person I knew. She gave up her dream so I could chase mine. She stood between me and every trouble that came our way. Today, she stands here, hoping for a happy life. And, like every brother, I want that for her more than anything." The room was silent. "But love," he said, "should never come with conditions." His voice broke slightly. He paused, swallowed, then continued. "I came here because no one else did. I came because she deserved a full room. But I'm staying, because I need to be sure she's safe." He looked directly at the groom's father, and then at the uncle who had been whispering earlier. "And if anyone tries to hurt her, silence her, or use tradition to break her spirit, they will answer to me." The audience gasped. The uncle stood ready to speak, but just then the side door slammed open. A woman entered, her clothes dusty, her hair wild. "He's right," she said, "and you all need to hear the truth about what this family has done." Mira turned around in shock. She recognized the woman immediately. So did the groom's father, and his face turned white. The woman at the door, the room stood in frozen silence. Even the children, who just moments ago had been running through the aisle with rose petals clutched in their small hands, stopped and turned. The music had cut off the instant the woman entered, as if the speakers themselves knew something sacred had just been broken. She stood in the doorway like a ghost stepping out of a forgotten memory. Her sari was wrinkled, the color faded from dust and sun. Her sandals were torn at the heel. Strands of hair clung to her damp forehead, and her eyes, wide and sharp, scanned the crowd like she was searching for something, or someone she had tried to forget, but never could. The priest took a nervous step back from the sacred fire. The groom's mother gasped, covering her mouth. A few of the older relatives exchanged glances, some standing, others sitting down as if unsure which would make them less visible. But Sundar didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply looked at her, studied her, and waited. Mira, now half standing in her seat beside the mandap, leaned forward. There was something in her expression, a flicker of recognition buried under layers of disbelief. This was not someone random. She wasn't a stranger. The woman's voice echoed, steady but raw. "I was 17 when they sent me away," she said. "They told everyone I ran off with someone, that I was shameful, that I brought dishonor to the family. But that's not the truth." The groom's father tried to step forward, but the uncle held him back. "Don't," he whispered. Don't make this worse. My name, the woman said, louder now, is Kavitha. A collective gasp ran through one side of the audience. Someone dropped a steel plate. It clattered loudly on the marble floor. The Google employees sat stiffly, caught in something far bigger than they had ever expected when they boarded their flight to India. I was your niece, Kavitha said, looking directly at the groom's father. Your blood. And you destroyed my life. The groom stood now, pale, his mouth slightly open. This is not the place, the father finally said, his voice shaking. This is a wedding. Yes, she snapped. A wedding. The same kind of day you used to hide my pain, to bury my story, but not today. She walked slowly toward the stage, her feet loud against the tile. Mira, she said, turning to the bride now. They've done this before. To me. To others. When a girl starts asking questions or wants to study or says no, they don't listen. They silence her. Politely if they can. Violently if they must. Mira's lips parted, her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was trapped inside her chest. Sundar stepped closer to his sister, standing just slightly in front of her now, not blocking her. Just there. Quietly. Like he always had been. Why now? The groom asked suddenly. His voice was tight, his shoulders tense. Why come here today? Kavitha turned to him. Because you're not like them, she said, almost kindly. You were a child when they made those decisions. You never had a chance to ask what really happened. But you're grown now, and you have a choice. He looked around, at the hall, at his family, at Sundar, and finally, at Mira. What are you saying? He asked. That they'll hurt her? Not with fists, Kavitha replied, but in other ways, slow ways. Silence, shame, control, making her feel like less until she becomes less. The priest, clearly nervous now, turned to Sundar. Sir, he said gently, should we continue the rituals? But Sundar didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Mira. It's your choice, Akka, he said. I'll support you no matter what. Even if you want to go through with this. Even if you want to walk away. Mira looked around. So many faces. So many expectations. And then she looked at Kavitha, the woman who should have been sitting among the elders, respected and loved. Instead, she was here, broken by history, but unafraid to speak. Can I ask you something? Mira said, finally finding her voice. Kavitha nodded. When they sent you away, where did you go? A pause. To a place with no name, Kavitha said softly. A women's shelter. Far from here. No money, no family. I cleaned floors, washed dishes, taught children who had been abandoned just like me. And every day I told myself, one day I'll come back. Not for revenge. Just for truth. A heavy silence followed. Mira's eyes welled up. Her body shook, not from fear but from something deeper. A rage she had never dared let out, now rising like a storm from the quiet sea inside her. You were 17, she whispered. Kavitha nodded. They told us you were a disgrace. I was 12. I believed them. Most did, Kavitha said. But I don't anymore, Mira said. Then she stood, not slowly, not shyly. She rose like someone realizing their own strength in real time. I can't do this, she said. Gasps rippled again. Not until I know who I'm marrying. Not until I know he sees me. Not just as a wife, but as a person. A whole person. The groom opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands trembled. I need to know, Mira said, that you won't become them. The groom stepped forward. Slowly. He looked at Sundar, then at Kavitha, then back at Mira. Give me a moment, he said quietly. Please. Then he turned and walked, not toward the stage, not toward his father or uncle, but toward the exit, toward the road. Outside, the media was still buzzing. Reporters whispered into their mics. Headlines were being drafted on smartphones. Nobody knew the full story, but they knew something powerful was happening. As the groom stepped into the sunlight, he pulled out his phone. He typed a message, sent it, waited, and then, after a minute, his phone buzzed. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Then he turned and walked back into the hall. His father stood as he entered. "Where were you?" he asked. "Getting answers," the groom said. "This isn't how we do things." The groom didn't reply. Instead, he walked straight to Mira and stopped in front of her. She didn't flinch. She stood tall. He turned to Kavitha. "My mother told me you were trouble," he said. "But I think you were just inconvenient." Kavitha blinked. "I'm sorry," he said. Then he turned to the audience. "This wedding will continue," he said clearly, "but only with honesty, with openness, and with respect. If anyone in my family disagrees, you are welcome to leave." A silence followed. No one moved, and slowly, one by one, people began to clap. Not a burst of applause, but something deeper, quieter, like the air itself was beginning to exhale. Sundar looked at Mira. She nodded slightly, the barest smile on her face. Then, he looked at Kavitha. She smiled, but her eyes still held pain. She walked toward the exit again, ready to disappear. But Sundar called out. "Stay," he said. She turned. "Please," he added. "This family was never complete without you." Kavitha stood still for a long moment, and then, slowly, quietly, she walked back in. The rituals resumed. The fire burned brighter. But as the priest recited the mantras, Sundar's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A single message. "We need to talk. Your past isn't what you think." He stared at it for a moment, the joy in his face dimming just slightly. The message was from an old number, a forgotten one. His hands tightened around the phone. Something wasn't over. Something was just beginning. Shadows behind the light. Sundar stared at his phone long after the ceremony had resumed. The fire in the mandap flickered, casting long golden shadows on the floor. Mira sat beside her groom again, her hands more still now, her eyes sharper, not because she was calm, but because something inside her had settled. Not peace exactly, but truth. The priest's voice rose and fell with practiced rhythm. Flower, petals floated down from the ceiling, caught in the heat of the fire, turning to ash before they reached the ground. But Sundar wasn't watching. He kept reading that message again and again. "We need to talk. Your past isn't what you think. No name, just the number." One he hadn't seen in over 20 years. He remembered it vaguely, like a shape in smoke, a number that used to call once every few months when he first moved to the United States. Never left a voicemail, never sent a name, always disconnected after the first ring. He had blocked it once, and then forgotten, until now. He looked up. Across the room, Kavitha was sitting beside a group of elderly women. They spoke to her now gently, their voices soft with apology. The children who had once avoided her were now circling her, offering sweets and trying to braid the loose strands of her hair, and for the first time in years she looked like she belonged. Sundar stood up quietly and stepped outside. The afternoon sun hit him like a wall, warm and blinding. The sound of traffic had returned to the edge of the wedding grounds. Most reporters had moved on, confused by the lack of scandal. What they'd found instead was harder to sell. A broken family mending itself in slow, painful silence. But for Sundar, the silence had just shattered. He called the number. It didn't ring. It answered immediately, and the voice on the other, Anne, made him stop breathing for a moment. "So," it said, "you finally picked up." He knew that voice, but he hadn't heard it in decades. "Is this a joke?" Sundar asked, trying to sound calm, though his voice was already shaking. "You still believe the story they told you?" The voice replied. "About your father? Your mother? How you were the lucky one?" "Who is this?" Sundar said more firmly now, but he already knew. "You remember the room with the cracked mirror, the voice said. Third house from the temple. Upstairs. Blue walls. Your mother used to hide food in the loose brick near the window. His legs almost gave out. This wasn't a prank. This was real. The voice continued. You left, but the truth stayed. And now it's time you hear it. The call disconnected. Sundar lowered the phone slowly, his breath caught in his throat. He turned around and looked at the building again. Inside, Mira was likely wrapping up the final steps of the wedding. Laughter, maybe. Relief. Something healing. But outside, in the brightness of day, a shadow was forming across his past. That night, the house was full again. People who had once ignored the family now stayed late, offering blessings and eating dinner with sticky hands and wide smiles. Mira sat beside her husband, still unsure but less afraid. Kavitha helped serve food, her hands graceful, her voice patient, like she had always been a part of this rhythm. Sundar remained quiet. He helped where he could. He hugged old relatives. He smiled when spoken to, but something behind his eyes had gone still. Later, after the crowd began to fade, he sat in the back courtyard under the neem tree where he used to study as a boy. The night was humid. Frogs croaked from the rice fields. A light flickered in the corner of the yard where the old well still stood, now covered, sealed with a stone slab. His mother sat beside him. Her hair was silver now, thinner. Her eyes had softened with age, but they still carried the wisdom of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. You're troubled, she said gently. He didn't answer. Something happened, she added. He nodded slowly. A call. From who? Someone who said, everything I know about our past is wrong. She didn't react, not right away, just reached down and picked up a piece of gravel, rubbed it between her fingers. What did they say? She asked. That our father wasn't the man I thought he was. A long pause. What did you think he was? She asked softly. A good man, Sundar replied. Flawed, strict, but good. Someone who sacrificed everything to educate me, who couldn't give much but gave what he had. His mother's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something heavier. There's more than one kind of sacrifice, she said. Sometimes people give up their truth to protect someone else's dream. He looked at her now, startled. You knew, he said. She didn't deny it. How long? He asked. Since before you left for college. Why didn't you ever tell me? She turned her face away toward the dark field. Because if I did, she whispered, you might never have left. And if you hadn't left, your life wouldn't be what it is. A lump formed in his throat. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. What did he do? Sundar asked finally. She turned back to him, and for a moment, she looked very old. Not to you, she said. Never to you, but to others, to Kavitha, to Mira, even to me. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers trembling. He didn't hit, but he controlled, manipulated, used silence as a weapon, made every woman in this house feel like they were guests, and he was the owner. Sundar looked away. When you were offered that scholarship, she continued, I saw a way out. Not for me, for you. And I knew if I told you the full truth, you'd stay. Because your heart? It's too soft, Beta. A tear finally slipped down his cheek. He remembered how his father used to sit on the front porch, silently reading the newspaper while his mother worked in the kitchen from morning till night. How he always made the final decision, even about things he didn't understand. How Kavitha disappeared without explanation. How Mira stopped asking questions around the age of 12, and he remembered how his father spoke to him, with pride. Always pride. As if Sundar was the single thread that held the family's honor together. I thought he loved me, Sundar whispered. He did, his mother said, in the only way he knew how, by choosing who was worthy of attention and who wasn't. He was a tyrant, Sundar said bitterly. His mother didn't argue, just sat beside him in silence. And in that silence, the truth finally settled. Not like a knife, but like a stone sinking slowly into water. Later that night, Sundar went back to the room where he had grown up. The walls were still the same shade of pale green. His old desk was still in the corner. Dusty, but untouched. He ran his fingers along it. Then he remembered the loose brick under the window. He crouched down, pulled at it gently, and it moved. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, was a bundle of papers, letters, receipts, photographs. He unfolded one, a picture of his father, standing with another man outside the temple. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "Don't trust what he shows the world." Another paper revealed a letter from Kavitha, unsent, begging for help. Dated 2 years after she had been sent away. There were more, but one caught his eye, a half-burned document, school records. It had his name, but the photo was wrong. Wasn't his, and beneath it, scrawled in quick, panicked writing, "His real son died. He took yours instead." Sundar dropped the paper. His breath left him. The ground beneath him shifted. Outside, the wind howled. Everything, his success, his path, his past, cracked like glass under weight. He wasn't who he thought he was, and someone had kept that secret for decades. The boy who disappeared, the room was no longer just a room. It was a graveyard of truths. Sundar sat on the cold stone floor, his back against the cracked wall, the bundle of papers spread around him like bones from a forgotten history. He couldn't feel the heat, even though the air was thick and humid. He couldn't hear the crickets outside or the distant voices of guests still celebrating in the courtyard. All he could hear was the sound of his own breathing, uneven, like waves crashing against rocks that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. His real son died. He took yours instead. The words repeated in his head over and over, louder each time until they were all he could think about. He picked up the half-burned document again. It was brittle, the corners blackened by flame, but enough remained to read. The name written under the photo was Arun. The school name was familiar. The handwriting in the margins wasn't. He reached for the photo. The boy's eyes stared up at him, wide and unblinking. He was thin, his hair cropped short. He wore a shirt one size too big, and yet there was something familiar in that gaze, something that felt close but not personal. Then he found another paper, a hospital form. Birth records. 2 names listed. Arun, deceased. Sundar, missing. Date, September 12th, 1984. He dropped the paper again. His hands were shaking. When Sundar was 9, he remembered falling from a tree near the village temple. He had climbed too high. Mira had warned him, but he wanted to impress their father. When he fell, he hit the back of his head and blacked out. When he woke up, he was in a strange room. White walls, a nurse he didn't recognize, and a man beside. Him who said, "You're home now." He had always assumed it was his father. But now, the memory felt different. Off. Like it belonged to someone else or like it had been rehearsed into something safe. He remembered being confused for weeks afterward, not remembering names easily, forgetting their cow's name, mixing up left and right. His mother had said it was the head injury, and maybe it was, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the moment he became someone else. Sundar stood up suddenly. He needed answers. He walked down the hallway, past the half-lit corridor, through the kitchen, and out the back where the neem tree swayed gently in the breeze. His mother was still sitting on the wooden bench staring at the sky. "Amma," he said. She turned slowly. "You found it," she said. His heart sank. "So it's true?" he whispered. She didn't respond. He stepped closer. Say it out loud." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. He staggered back a step as if struck. "You were not born to me. she said. But you became mine. Sundar's breath caught in his throat. Your father worked in a government office before he took that job at the steel factory. One day he came home with a boy. You. He said you were the child of a widow who couldn't care for you. He said the woman had left town and he had taken pity. I believed him. She paused. But weeks later, I found letters. Forms. The truth. His real son had died in a bus accident. He couldn't bear the shame. So he brought you in. From another hospital. Another family. Sundar dropped to the bench, unable to stand. Who were my real parents? He asked. I don't know, she said, pain thick in her voice. He never told me. He erased them from your life. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice cracked. Because by the time I wanted to, you had already called me Amma. You had already held my hand when you were sick. You had already kissed my forehead when you left for college. How could I destroy that? He looked at her, his eyes full of unspeakable grief. I deserve to know, he whispered. Yes, she said. You did. They sat there in silence. Until she reached out and held his hand again. Just like she had done when he was a boy afraid of thunder. You may not be born of my blood, she said. But you are the child of my soul. The next morning, Sundar went to the hospital listed in the document. He walked through the old corridors, faded blue paint peeling from the walls. The reception desk was still made of wood, with files stacked high, and a ceiling fan spinning lazily. Above, he spoke to a nurse who had worked there for over 30 years. I need to know about a boy named Sundar, he said. Missing. Around 1984. The nurse looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Follow me. They walked down a corridor to a dusty archive room. After half an hour of searching, she pulled out a folder. Inside was a photo, a woman holding a child, and beneath it a name written in red ink. Lakshmi Sundaralingam. Status. Missing child reported. Last seen. Village near Madurai. Sundar's voice broke as he whispered. She looked for me. The nurse nodded. She came back every year for 4 years, she said. Then she stopped. Why? No one told her anything. The man who took you worked in the system, forged papers, closed doors. Sundar clutched the file tightly. For the first time in his life, he saw the face of his birth mother. He returned to the wedding house later that night. Mira had changed into a simple sari. The guests were gone. Kavitha sat nearby, braiding, a little girl's hair, smiling softly. Mira looked at him. You look different, she said. I am, he replied. He told her everything. He told Kavitha too. They listened in silence. Do you hate him? Mira asked after a long pause. I don't know, Sundar said. I think I mourn him. Not just for what he did, but for how he robbed all of us. Of truth, of peace, of roots. Kavitha nodded. And what will you do now? Sundar looked at the file again. Find her, he said. The woman in the photo. The one who never stopped looking. You think she's still alive? I don't know, he said. But if she is, she deserves to know I made it. As the stars scattered across the night sky, Sundar walked outside again. The village was quieter now. The reporters were gone. The guests had returned to their lives, but his journey was far from over. He was no longer just the CEO of a company. He was a man caught between two lives, one given by choice, the other taken without permission. And now he would begin a search, not for revenge, not for headlines, but for a mother who had waited by the roadside year after year, holding on to hope that one day her son would find his way back home. And, as he stared at the horizon, the wind carried a sound, like the faint cry of a woman calling out a name in the dark. And this time, Sundar was ready to answer. The road back to her, the road stretched out before him like a long breath held for too many years. Sundar sat in the back seat of a modest black car, the kind usually used by local officials or traveling doctors in rural India. The driver, a quiet older man with tired eyes, barely spoke during the 4-hour ride. The sky above was a heavy gray, thick with monsoon clouds that hadn't yet broken open. The air was wet, but not raining. It felt like the world was holding its tears for the right moment. In Sundar's lap sat a thin manila folder. Inside was the photo of a woman with kind eyes and a frayed sari, holding a boy with a familiar face. His face. Or at least the one he used to have before the years reshaped him into someone else. The name beneath the photo echoed in his mind over and over again. Lakshmi Sundarlingam. She was once his mother. Or perhaps she still was. He had spent decades calling another woman Amma, and truly she had earned it. She had raised him, fed him, held him when he was sick, and never once made him feel like an outsider. He loved her. That would never change. But there was a hole in his history, and it had a name. Lakshmi. They reached the village just before dusk. It was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe it had always been this small, and success had made everything from his past feel distant, like a faded photograph curled at the edges. There was no sign, no gate, just a row of old stone houses lined along a narrow dirt path that forked into the fields. Goats wandered freely, bells around their necks clinking like soft chimes. Children chased one another barefoot in the dust. An old man sat on a wooden bench, chewing pan and staring into nothing. Sundar stepped out of the car. The villagers noticed immediately. Not because they recognized him, few of them did, but because he didn't belong. He walked too straight. His shirt was too clean. His shoes didn't touch the ground like theirs did. A young girl pointed. "Are you from the city?" He nodded gently. "I'm looking for someone." He showed them the photo. The girl's face changed. "Amma Lakshmi," she said softly. "She lives near the temple, at the edge of the river." He thanked her and began to walk. The temple looked the same. The bricks were old and chipped. The bells above the gate rusted but still ringing, faintly in the wind. The river behind it flowed slow and wide, muddy from the monsoon but still calm. And then he saw the house. Small, almost too small to be called a house. More like a room with a roof. Flowers grew along the windowsill, hibiscus and tulsi, neatly kept. A metal pot sat by the door, still steaming slightly from recent use. A cotton sari hung on the clothesline, fluttering like a quiet whisper. He hesitated at the door. His hand lifted, stopped, hovered. For a second, he wasn't the man who had walked into corporate boardrooms, who had stood before world leaders, who had changed the way billions lived. He was a child again, a boy who didn't know where he came from. Then, slowly, he knocked. Moment passed, then another. The door opened. And there she was. She was older now, of course. Her hair was silver and pulled back into a loose braid. Her skin was weathered, the lines deep around her eyes and mouth. Her shoulders were thinner, her hands calloused from years of labor. But her eyes were exactly the same, and when she looked at him, the pot in her hand dropped to the floor. "No," she whispered. Sundar couldn't speak. She stepped forward, tears already rising. "You..." Her voice cracked. "You are... him?" He nodded slowly. Her hands shook as she reached out but stopped herself halfway. "Is it really you?" she asked. He pulled out the photo, held it in front of her, then took her hand and placed it against his chest. "I don't remember everything," he said, "but I've carried the hole inside me for as long as I've lived." Her knees gave out. He caught her before she fell. They sat on the floor together like mother and son, like strangers and soulmates, and for a long time, neither of them said anything. There were no words that could hold 28 years of silence. Only touch. Only breath. Only tears. Later they sat inside. She brought him tea. The cup trembled slightly in her hands, but she served him like it was second nature, the way a mother serves her son. "I came looking for you for 4 years," she said. "I sold my bangles to print posters, begged doctors, prayed. But one day they told me to stop. They said you were gone. that I had to move on. I didn't know, he said. I was told I belonged somewhere else. They changed my school name, moved me to another town. Told me I was theirs, she nodded. They didn't want shame, she said bitterly. So they stole a child and left a mother to grieve alone. Sundar looked around the house. It was clean, humble, too quiet. Do you have other children? He asked. No, she said. There was only ever you. He looked down at his cup. I don't know how to come back, he said quietly. She reached across the table and touched his hand. You don't have to, she said. You were never really gone. The next morning, Sundar stood by the river. The sun was rising. The sky had begun to glow orange and pink. He could hear the temple bell ring behind him, a soft, steady rhythm that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. Looked into the water, his reflection stared back. Older now. No longer a boy, not quite at peace, but clearer. Like someone who had removed a mask they didn't know they were wearing. Kavitha had messaged him. She was doing well, staying in the village for now, helping rebuild the school library. Mira and her husband were traveling. A short trip, just the two of them. They were learning to talk without fear, and his adoptive mother, his Amma, had called him the night before. She didn't say much, just told him to take his time, to follow his heart, and that she would always be waiting with warm rice and sambar, no matter where he went or what name he carried. For the first time in his life, Sundar felt whole, not because everything made sense, but because it didn't have to. He had two mothers. One had given him roots, the other had given him wings. And now, with both in his heart, he was ready to live not as the boy who was taken, or the man who succeeded, but as the soul who returned. Weeks later, at a press conference in California, a reporter asked him something simple. You've spoken a lot about innovation and leadership, she said, but who do you think made you who you are? Sundar smiled. And for a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned into the mic.